This class is part of the series on the minor prophets taught in the winter-spring semester of Michigan Bible School in the facilities of Church of Christ West in Plymouth, Michigan, during January to April 2015.
To the book of Nahum. The word Nahum means comfort or compassion. He says, this is the burden of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. An Elkoshite is simply a person from Elkosh. It was the name of a village. But where was the village? There's a site in Galilee and a site in Judea, both of which seem to have an equal weight of evidence as this might have been the location. Well, they can't both have been the same city. They're miles and miles apart. But one archaeologist says, you know what, it looks like this could be the place. Another guy says, no, it looks to me like this could be the place. And you look at all their evidence and you kind of toss them up. It's hard to tell which is which. But when we're looking at the man Nahum, we don't have to look very far because there's just nothing else to see. This is all we know about this person. We know that he was a prophet, and we know that he was from Elkosh, and we know that his name means comfort. That's all we know. And what's written in the book, and we know what he said, but as far as him as a person, we don't know. What is this book about? How can we summarize the book of Nehemiah? The just vengeance of God against sinners and his loving kindness to the faithful. That's the same theme that we've seen over and over again in these prophets. We talked about it with regard to Micah just a little while ago before our break, that we see both retribution for their sin and hope of restoration for their repentance. We can divide this book up again into 3 points, and those go naturally with the chapters, the way the book is divided. In the first chapter, the coming of the Lord in judgment against Nineveh, and in the second chapter, the siege and fall of Nineveh, and finally in chapter 3, why Nineveh fell, the specific list of sins and their description. You'll notice from that the book is about Nineveh. Notice again verse 1, the burden of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. This is a prophecy. We talked about that word burden before. It just means a message, something to carry, a load, a burden. That's the message that God gave him to carry to Nineveh. Now we say carry to Nineveh. There's no evidence that he actually went to Nineveh, that he was physically in the place when he was preaching this message. That has been debated. There's no way to prove that one way or the other. The book was probably written and published in Jerusalem, but it may be that he preached this material vocally before he wrote it. And where did he preach it? Was it in Jerusalem or was it in Nineveh? We don't know that. And you'll find commentators arguing it one way or the other, and it's all going to be speculation. There just isn't any evidence really that even deals with it so far as I know anything about. Not that I'm an expert. When we look at the outstanding features of the book, which I like to do, what is unique about this book? What stands out about this book that helps me to keep an idea as to what it is all about? One thing we see here, Nahum doesn't say anything about God called me to preach. He told me to go so-and-so. God said such and such. Now, we do find a couple of phrases, thus saith the Lord, but there's no statement in here such as Isaiah says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the temple filled and all of this. We don't find anything like that from Nahum. We don't know how long Nahum prophesied. His book is very short. Was this the only prophecy that he ever made? We don't know. Maybe. He might have preached on for years. We don't know. But we can narrow down his date to somewhere between 664 and 612. Why do we do that? He makes reference to the destruction of No. Like No was destroyed, so Nineveh will be destroyed. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit more when we get to that point. But those No was destroyed. No is an abbreviation for a nickname of the city of Thebes, and we'll talk about that more, I think, when we come to it. But Thebes was destroyed in about 666 to 661, maybe somewhere in there. I think Brother Lewis has 661 in his book. I've got 664 in my book. That's only 3 years apart, so you're within that 5-year ballpark. That's identical. Back that far, it was somewhere in that time frame. And Nineveh destroyed, as we said, in 612. So it had to be after the one and before the other, because that's what he's talking about. So we can narrow down his prophecy to that short time frame. Brother Lewis refers to it as a long time frame. I think that's a pretty short time frame with that far back in history. Second point that we notice about the book of Nahum is, it really sounds like a sequel to the book of Jonah. Jonah preached to Nineveh, right?
Yeah.
He went to Nineveh and he walked through the city, and then, we said when we came to the end of Jonah, what did we say? Wouldn't you like to know what happened next?
Yeah.
Now we know, right? Now we know. Now this is about 100 years, a little over 100 years later, okay? But we can find out how it turned out. Back in the days of Jonah, Nineveh repented. They've got a different set of kings on the throne now. For about the last 80 years, they've had nothing but wickedness out of that city. And they have come to the end of their time. And God sent Nahum to prophesy of their destruction. Why would God send a preacher from Israel to prophesy to a heathen nation? We'll see that too as we come to it. God had used Nineveh. He had set up Nineveh to punish the northern kingdom of Israel. They were his servants. They could have known better. They had the opportunity to know better and do better than what they were doing. They didn't do it. So God is now speaking to them directly through the prophet Nahum. The third point is very interesting. We don't see in an English translation, but this book is written in an interesting poetic form. Do you know what an acrostic poem is? You take a word like, say, Bible, Bible, and you put the letters down the column like this, and then you make words out like this, like basic instruction before leaving Earth. You've seen that kind of thing? Something. That's an acrostic, okay? That's one way to do a poem. An alphabetic acrostic is every line, say like the first 2 lines begin with A, and the next 2 lines begin with B, and the next 2 lines begin with C, or 4 lines, or however you want to set it up. This is an interesting twist on the acrostic poem. If you've got a copy of my book, I gave you a brief, maybe weak and pitiful example, but it's in there on page number 234 at the end of the second paragraph. What he has done here is he has used the same phonetic sound. A, B, 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 k, 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 ch, 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 things like that, okay? The same sound recurs over and over again. As if this paragraph had been, catch the A's and then the B's and the C's and the D's going through this. Nahum's able proclamation made in the shape of an aid, poetic, but we barely break the barrier of observation, not being Hebrews. You see the repetition of the sound, contrary to characteristic occurrences. The case with this communication is curious. You see that? That's the kind of way that Nahum was written in Hebrew, with that repetition of phonemes, letter combinations that sound the same. or very nearly the same. It's unfortunate that that doesn't come through in English, and I don't read Hebrew, so I don't really know what it actually sounded like. But it's an interesting fact about the book. We talked earlier on in our basic introduction to this course about the books of history and poetry and prophecy and law, and said there's a lot of overlapping and interchanging. Well, here's a book of prophecy that's written in poetic form. And the poetic form changes. Chapter 1 is after one fashion, and chapter 2 and chapter 3 after a different fashion. So when he changes points, so we outlined the book in points 1, 2, and 3, and now it's divided into chapters 1, 2, and 3. When he changed points, he changed styles, which is a very interesting literary technique. So let's turn to chapter 1. And Judy, I believe it's your turn to read. If you would, please. It's lengthy. Most of the readings in this book are going to be lengthy because just the arguments are long that he makes in here. So we're going to have to read longer sections. But if you would, verses 12 through 15, please.
Thus says the Lord, though they are safe, and likewise many, yet in this manner they will be cut down when he passes through. Though I have afflicted you, I will afflict you no more. For now I will break off his yoke from you and burst your bonds apart. The Lord has given a command concerning you. Your name shall be perpetuated no longer out of the house of your God. I will cut off the carved images and the molded image. I will dig your grave, for you are vile. Behold, on the mountains the feet of him who brings good tidings, who proclaims peace. O Judah, keep your appointed feast, perform your vows, for the wicked one shall no more pass through you. He is utterly cut off.
God, the prophecy is generally to Nineveh with some effect to Judah. Now Nineveh, Assyria, was the capital in the country that carried away the northern kingdom, right? But they tried to come and take away the southern kingdom, and they got a few cities here and there, chipped away at the size of the southern kingdom. And this was after, of course, or right about the time of the fall of Samaria, probably after. And Judah is threatened. And so a word of comfort is given to Judah while destruction is being preached to Nineveh. Don't worry about them. They're not going to hurt you. They came against the southern kings and came and made great threats. And God said, don't worry about it. He's going to go off. And this happened a couple of times, that they tried to come and take the southern kingdom. But God is making a prophecy here that will not happen. Keep your feast. Perform your vows, Judah. Keep on going. Everything's going to be all right. You just keep doing what you're supposed to be doing, and God will take care of the rest of it. All right? Any questions or thoughts on that? Look at chapter 2 then in verse number 7, Alvin, if you would.
Chapter 2, verse 7.
Uh-huh.
The queen of Nineveh is brought out naked to the streets, and led away a slave with all of her maidens weeping after her. Listening to them mourn like doves and beat their breasts.
Huzzah means that which is established, something that is firmly set, established, long-standing, firm. It's just there. Rock of Gibraltar. Okay, that kind of thing. Something that appears from all experience to be unshakable, unmovable. God said, well, you can be unshakable all you want to, but you're going to be shaken, and you're going to be moved.
Oh, okay, so you're saying, and established shall be led away captive.
Yeah, that which you think is firmly planted is going to be plucked up and carried off.
Amen.
Yep, that's what he's saying here. Okay, you got it? He's talking to Nineveh. You think you're so proud, you're so high and mighty, you rule the whole world. Well, the whole civilized world as they knew it. You're just not all that impregnable here. You're going to be destroyed. And, when they think that they are immovable, They think they can't be taken down. Then when they do, it's that much more dramatic and that much more significant to world history when something that strong is gone. The British Empire. The sun never sets on the British Empire. Well, it does now. And at one time, for a long time in history, it was seen as, an entrenched, what's the word I'm looking for? Society. It's something that's established and isn't going to be shaken. But it was. And Assyria here was the same thing. They thought that they were set, they were in control, they had the greatest power, nothing could take them down, but they were taken down. Verses 9 through 11.
9 through 11. Take ye the spoil of silver, take the spoil of gold, but there is none end of that store, and glory out of all the pleasant furniture.
On through 11.
He is empty and void and waste, and the heart melteth, and the knees smite together, and much pain is in all loins, and the face of them all gather blackness. Where is the dwelling of the lions, and the feeding place of the young lions, where the lion, even the old lion, walked, and the lions dwelt, and none made them afraid.
Thank you. Verses 9 and 10 may be a little bit easier to understand than verse 12. He's describing the complete, utter destruction of Nineveh. That great city with that great wall around it, they're talking about having chariot races around the wall, impregnable city, is going to be just completely, there's not going to be anything left that anybody can build a kingdom out of, much less an empire. Won't be able to build a city out of it. In fact, the destruction of Nineveh was so complete when it finally came. The ground was leveled, there was nothing left, and for over, 2,000 years, there were people who denied that Nineveh ever even existed. There just wasn't any appearance of it anywhere. Oh, that's an error in the Bible. No such place ever existed. That's just a parable. Well, in the 19th century, archaeologists discovered the location of Nineveh. They knew exactly where it was. You know how big it was. An early Middle Ages writer commented on a wall 60 miles in circumference. The actual archaeology has dug up the circumference of that wall. It's more like 7.5 miles. But still, that's a pretty good-sized city, and it was a very strong city. It took the alliance of 3 strong nations to bring them down, but they did. And it was a complete and utter destruction, as he says here. But that 11th verse, what's he talking about the lions? It's an illustration. It's a comparison or a parable, if you will.
Is it an analogy? Analogy?
Yeah, an analogy. The whole country of the city is like a lion roaming about in his territory in the forest, and when he comes back today, whoa, wait a minute, where's all my food? Where's my kingdom? The great lion, the king of the beasts. Nobody takes down a lion, He owns the place. But now he's walking through there and there's nothing left to eat. There's no kingdom to rule over. That's what verse 11 is. It's an illustration, an analogy, illustrating the destruction of Nineveh. Chapter 3, Dewana, the first 4 verses, please.
Woe to the bloody city, it is all full of lies and robbery. Its victims never depart. The noise of a whip and the noise of a rattling wheels, of galloping horses, of clattering chariots, horsemen charged with bright swords and glittering spears. There is a multitude of slain, a great number of bodies, countless corpses. They stumble over the corpses, because the multitude of the harlotries and of the seductive harlot, the mistress of sorceries, who sell nations through her harlotries, and families through her sorceries.
All of that is because of the wickedness described in verse 4. Well, what was happening because of that wickedness? Murder, destruction, slaying people in the streets. The horses, the chariots, just roaming through the streets and slaughtering everything that comes along. It is still, it's a description of a lot of activity and a lot of terror and fury in the streets. And that's what was going on, that's what was happening to Nineveh. Either happening here, or more probably he's prophesying that it's about to happen. Obviously he's talking before the destruction of the city, and this is what's coming up. All right, let's look at verses 8 through 10, please, and then I'm going to have a little bit lengthy comment on some of this. Carolyn, if you would.
Are you better than Nahum, that was situated by the river, that had the waters around her, whose rampart was the sea, whose wall was the sea? Ethiopia and Egypt were her strength, and it was boundless. Put and Lubim were your helpers, yet she was carried away. She went into captivity. Her young children also were dashed in pieces. At the head of every street, they cast lots for her honorable men, and all the great men were bound in chains.
Okay, thank you very much. A couple of names, places, descriptions in here. In the King James it says no. She read Noammon in the American Standard Version, some other English translations. As I mentioned in the beginning, No is an abbreviation of Noammon, which it means the city of Ames, who was one of the pharaohs of Egypt. That's a nickname for the city. The city was properly called Thebes. It was called the city of Ames, but it was Thebes was the name of the town. Ames the first was the guy who expelled the Hyksos pharaoh line out of Egypt and founded the 18th dynasty, the different ruling class of people over Egypt. The Hyksos were possibly the people who were in power in the days of Moses, although there's a lot of debate about that. That's one of the possibilities, one of the identifications of who they were and when they lived. So this is going way back in history. But the connection with Nineveh is why it's here in the book today, and why it was put in the book of Nahum. The Assyrian king A.L.Parr, about whom we can read in the Bible, plundered the city in 664. Up until that time, Thebes had been the center of culture, power, civilization in Egypt. Ashurbanipal came along in 664 and pretty well ravished the city, and then 3 or 4 years later came back and completely destroyed the city until there was nothing left of it. And that's why it's referred to here. What happened to Noah, and you did it, is what's going to happen to you next. The Assyrians had come down and leveled Thebes, and now Nineveh was going to be leveled just like Thebes was. The destruction here, the description of that destruction is, again, pretty complete, like we just saw with Nineveh in the previous chapter. But he makes reference to Put and Lubim. Put is another name for the nation of Libya. According to the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, we talked about that in the beginning of this series. When you look into Jeremiah chapter 56 and Ezekiel chapter 30, you'll find specific references there in my book, if you want to look at that. And Josephus in the book of Antiquities, book 1, chapter 6, and paragraph 2, identifies Put as Libya, And Lubim is a plural Hebrew word which probably refers to, generally considered to refer to, the Libyans. So Libya and the people of Libya, Libya and the Libyans is what he's saying here, are going to help to destroy you. Pharaoh Shishak employed the Libyans in his invasion of Palestine, according to 2 Chronicles chapters 13 and 16. And they had helped Egypt earlier in their struggles against helping Assyria. Get this straight. The Libyans had helped Assyria to put Egypt down, to limit Egypt's power, to kind of push them back into their own land, because Egypt was trying to take over southern Israel for a very long time and influenced even Solomon when he was reigning. The prophecy here is that Assyria is going to be destroyed in a way similar to the way Thebes was destroyed. And it's going to be defeated by people who had been their former allies. The Libyans had helped the Assyrians destroy Thebes, and now the Libyans were going to turn on Assyria. And they were going to help the Babylonians and the Persians to destroy Nineveh and the Assyrian Empire, which they did. As we said, in 612 they destroyed the city of Nineveh, and in 606 the last remnants of the Assyrian Empire. Nabopolassar was the king of Babylon at that time. He's the one that helped to destroy Nineveh. The Babylonians had been a part of the Assyrian Empire, and they rose up to conquer Nineveh, and they built themselves an empire, of which the Medes and the Persians were a part, and they later combined together and destroyed the Babylonian power and influence. So all of that is being discussed in brief as it was beginning here in the prophecy of Nineveh. Just go straight to the 18th verse, and I think, Chuck, we're around to you again.
The shepherds slumber, O king of Assyria. Thy noble shall dwell in the dust. Thy people is scattered upon the mountains, and no man gathered them.
The people of Nineveh were to be scattered so that they couldn't group together and rebuild the empire, and never to come together again to build up a kingdom. God, of course, prophesied similar things against Babylon, that Babylon would never be rebuilt, and it hasn't been to this day. And he also prophesied similar things against Egypt when they were finally defeated in the days of the Babylonians, that Egypt would never again be a ruler of peoples outside their own boundaries. And while they have tried numerous times, even in our lifetime, they've never been able to do it. God said they never will. Nations that were once mighty empires have been brought down at the prophecy of God. And in these three occasions, examples, he said that they would never rise up again. And so they have not. By the way, let's go back to that 13th verse. I don't have a slide on that, but I want to comment on something on the 13th verse. Behold, thy people in the midst of thee are women. The gates of thy land shall be set wide open to thine enemies, and fire shall devour thy bars. That's a figure of speech. The total population of Nineveh was not female. It means the strength of your city against the enemy that's coming is like an army of women trying to fight against a strong army. In other words, you don't have enough strength to defend yourself. That's all he's saying here. You fight like women. Fight like women. That's kind of what he was saying here.
Well, he didn't have any Russian women.
That's true. Yeah, that's exactly right. But here again, remember that you're talking about a culture in which women were not educated. They had no privileges. They weren't typically in the business force. They were not any kind of force at all. They were just housekeepers.
They weren't in the army.
No, they were not. That's right. That's right.
Thank you for studying with this Confirming the Churches program, produced by Skyway Publishing. Confirming the Churches exists to encourage and assist churches to adhere to the original teachings of the apostles of Jesus Christ regarding the organization, doctrine, worship, and work of all churches everywhere. Study guides, books, tracts, and essays in print and online, as well as audio and video productions on disc and online, are employed to this end. All are free of charge in the English language and in several other languages to mission churches around the world. To request the lessons of your choice or an in-person seminar with our evangelists and teachers, please see our listing and information at www.skywaypub.org or call toll-free in the U.S. and Canada to 844-650-3223. May God bless you today.